This is a reading of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's own summary of his book, Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief. At the beginning of every chapter and subchapter of Peterson's Maps of Meaning is his own summary of that section. Since neither in audio form or in written form have I found these summaries organized nor verbalized, I decided to take it upon myself to organize them, as seen on the screen, and read aloud so you can listen. Lastly, don't forget that you can adjust the speed of this audio recording at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Let's begin. Preface. De scientis ad inferos. Something we cannot see protects us from something we do not understand. The thing we cannot see is culture, in its intrapsychic or internal manifestation. The thing we do not understand is the chaos that gave rise to culture. If the structure of culture is disrupted, unwittingly, chaos returns. We will do anything, to defend ourselves against that return. Quote, "The very fact that a general problem has gripped and assimilated the whole of a person is a guarantee that the speaker has really experienced it, and perhaps gained something from his sufferings. He will then reflect the problem for us in his personal life, and thereby show us a truth." End quote. Carl Jung. Also, quote, "Although seemingly paradoxical, the person who takes upon himself the people's humiliation is fit to rule, and he is fit to lead who takes the country's disasters upon himself." End quote. Lao Tzu. Chapter 1. Maps of Experience. Object and Meaning. The world can be validly construed as a forum for action or as a place of things. The former manner of interpretation, more primordial and less clearly understood, finds its expression in the arts or humanities, in ritual, drama, literature, and mythology. The world as a forum for action is a place of value, a place where all things have meaning. This meaning, which is shaped as a consequence of social interaction, is implication for action, or, at a higher level of analysis, implication for the configuration of the interpretive schema that produces or guides action. The latter manner of interpretation, the world as a place of things, finds its formal expression in the methods and theories of science. Science allows for increasingly precise determination of the consensually validatable properties of things, and for efficient utilization of precisely determined things as tools, once the direction such use is to take has been determined through application of more fundamental narrative processes. No complete world picture can be generated without both modes of construal. The fact that one mode is generally set at odds with the other means that the nature of their respective domains remains insufficiently discriminated. Adherents of the mythological worldview tend to regard the statements of their creeds as indistinguishable from empirical fact, even though such statements were generally formulated long before the notion of objective reality emerged. Those who, by contrast, accept the scientific perspective, who assume that it is or might become complete, forget that an impassable gulf currently divides what is from what should be. We need to know four things: what there is, what to do about what there is, that there is a difference between knowing what there is and knowing what to do about what there is, and what that difference is. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Maps of Meaning. 3 Levels of Analysis. Human beings are prepared, biologically, to respond to anomalous information, to novelty. This instinctive response includes redirection of attention, generation of emotion, fear, first, generally speaking, then curiosity, and behavioral compulsion, cessation of ongoing activity first, generally speaking, then active approach and exploration. This pattern of instinctive response drives learning, particularly but not exclusively the learning of appropriate behavior. All such learning takes place, or took place originally, as a consequence of contact with novelty, or anomaly. What is novel is of course dependent on what is known, is necessarily defined in opposition to what is known. Furthermore, what is known is always known conditionally, since human knowledge is necessarily limited. Our conditional knowledge, insofar as that knowledge is relevant for the regulation of emotion, consists of our models of the emotional significance of the present, defined in opposition to an idealized, hypothetical, or fantasied future state. We evaluate the unbearable present in relationship to the ideal future. We act to transform where we are into where we would like to be. When our attempts to transform the present work as planned, we remain firmly positioned in the domain of the known, metaphorically speaking. When our behaviors produce results that we did not want, however, that is, when we err, we move into the domain of the unknown, where more primordial emotional forces rule. Small-scale errors force us to reconstruct our plans, but allow us to retain our goals and our conceptualizations of present conditions. Catastrophic errors, by contrast, force us not only to reevaluate our means, but our starting points and our ends. Such reevaluation necessarily involves extreme emotional dysregulation. The domain of the known and the domain of the unknown can reasonably be regarded as permanent constituent elements of human experience, even of the human environment. Regardless of culture, place, and time, human individuals are forced to adapt to the fact of culture, the domain of the known, roughly speaking, and the fact of its ultimate insufficiency, as the domain of the unknown necessarily remains extant, regardless of extent of previous adaptation. The human brain, and the higher animal brain, appears therefore to have adapted itself to the eternal presence of these two places. The brain has one mode of operation when in explored territory, and another when in unexplored territory. In the unexplored world, caution, expressed in fear and behavioral immobility, initially predominates, but may be superseded by curiosity, expressed in hope, excitement, and, above all, in creative exploratory behavior. Creative exploration of the unknown and consequent generation of knowledge is construction or update of patterns of behavior and representation, such that the unknown is transformed from something terrifying and compelling into something beneficial, or at least something irrelevant. The presence of capacity for such creative exploration and knowledge generation may be regarded as the third and final permanent constituent element of human experience, in addition to the domain of the known and unknown. Mythological representations of the world, which are representations of reality as a form for action, portray the dynamic interrelationship between all three constituent elements of human experience. The eternal unknown, nature, metaphorically speaking, creative and destructive, source and destination of all determinate things, is generally ascribed an affectively ambivalent feminine character, as the mother and eventual devourer of every one and everything. The eternal known, in contrast, culture, defined territory, tyrannical and protective, predictable, disciplined and restrictive, cumulative consequence of heroic and exploratory behavior, is typically considered masculine, in contradistinction to Mother Nature. The eternal knower, finally, the process that mediates between the known and the unknown, is the knight who slays the dragon of chaos, the hero who replaces disorder and confusion with clarity and certainty, the sun god who eternally slays the forces of darkness, and the word that engenders creation of the cosmos. Chapter 2.1 Normal and Revolutionary Life. Two prosaic stories. We tell ourselves stories about who we are, where we would like to be, and how we are going to get there. These stories regulate our emotions by determining the significance of all the things we encounter and all the events we experience. We regard things that get us on our way as positive, things that impede our progress as negative, and things that do neither as irrelevant. Most things are irrelevant, and that is a good thing, as we have limited attentional resources. Inconveniences interfere with our plans. We do not like inconveniences, and will avoid dealing with them. Nonetheless, they occur commonly. So commonly, in fact, that they might be regarded as an integral, predictable, and constant feature of the human environment. We have adapted to this feature, have the intrinsic resources to cope with inconveniences. We benefit, become stronger in doing so. Ignored inconveniences accumulate, rather than disappear. When they accumulate in sufficient numbers, they produce a catastrophe, a self-induced catastrophe to be sure, but one that may be indistinguishable from an act of God. Inconveniences interfere with the integrity of our plans, so we tend to pretend that they are not there. Catastrophes, by contrast, interfere with the integrity of our whole stories and massively dysregulate our emotions. By their nature, they are harder to ignore, although that does not stop us from trying to do so. Inconveniences are common. Unfortunately, so are catastrophes, self-induced and otherwise. We are adapted to catastrophes, like inconveniences, as constant environmental features. We can resolve a catastrophe just as we can cope with an inconvenience, although at a higher cost. As a consequence of this adaptation, this capacity for resolution, catastrophe can rejuvenate. It can also destroy. The more ignored inconveniences in a given catastrophe, the more likely it will destroy. Chapter 2.2 Neuropsychological Function. The Nature of the Mind. It is reasonable to regard the world as a forum for action, as a place made up of the familiar and the unfamiliar in eternal juxtaposition. The brain is actually composed, in large part, of two subsystems adapted for action in that place. The right hemisphere, broadly speaking, responds to novelty with caution and rapid global hypothesis formation. The left hemisphere, by contrast, tends to remain in charge when things, that is, explicitly categorized things, are unfolding according to plan. The right hemisphere draws rapid, global, valence-based metaphorical pictures of novel things. The left, with its greater capacity for detail, makes such pictures explicit and verbal. Thus, the exploratory capacity of the brain builds the world of the familiar, of the known, from the world of the unfamiliar, the unknown. When the world remains known and familiar, that is, when our beliefs maintain their validity, our emotions remain under control. When the world suddenly transforms itself into something new, however, our emotions are dysregulated, in keeping with the relative novelty of that transformation, and we are forced to retreat, or to explore once again. Chapter 2.3 Mythological Representation, the Constituent Elements of Experience. Myth represents the world as forum for action. The world as forum for action is comprised of three eternally extant constituent elements of experience, and a fourth that precedes them. The unknown, the knower, and the known make up the world as place of drama. The indeterminate pre-cosmogonic chaos preceding their emergence serves as the ultimate source of all things, including the three constituent elements of experience. The pre-cosmogonic chaos tends to take metaphorical form as the Ouroboros, the self-consuming serpent, who represents the union of matter and spirit and the possibility of transformation. The Ouroboros serves as primal source of the mythological world parents, the Great Mother, nature, deity of the unknown, creative and destructive, the Great Father, culture, deity of the familiar, tyrannical and protective, and of their divine son, the knower, the generative word, the process of exploration. The ancient Mesopotamian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, provides a concrete example of the interplay of these personalities. This myth features four main characters, or sets of characters. Tiamat, the feminine dragon of chaos, primordial goddess of creation. The Ouroboros and the Great Mother are conflated, as is frequently the case in this myth. Apsu, Tiamat's husband and consort, the elder gods, children of Tiamat and Apsu, and Marduk, sun deity and mythic hero. Tiamat symbolizes the great unknown, the matrix of the world. Apsu the known, the pattern that makes regulated existence possible. The elder gods symbolize the common psychological attributes of humanity, the fragments or constituent elements of consciousness, and constitute a more thorough representation of the constituent elements of the patriarchal known. Marduk, greatest of the secondary deities, represents the process that eternally mediates between matrix and regulated existence. The original union of Tiamat and Apsu brings the elder gods into being. These gods carelessly kill Apsu, upon who they unconsciously depend. Tiamat reappears with a vengeance and decides to destroy everything she has created. Her children send one volunteer after another out to overpower her. All fail. Finally, Marduk offers to do battle. He is elected as king, as the greatest of gods, as the determiner of destinies, and voluntarily confronts Tiamat. He cuts her apart and creates the cosmos from her pieces. The Mesopotamian emperor, who ritually embodies Marduk, acts out this battle during the festival of the New Year, when the old world is renewed. The Enuma Elish expresses in image and narrative the idea that the psychological function giving order to chaos, 1, creates the cosmos, and 2, should occupy a superordinate position in the intrapsychic and social domains. The ideas contained in this myth are given more elaborated expression in later Egyptian works of metaphysical speculation, which more directly address the idea of the heroic renewal of culture. The three constituent elements of experience, and the fourth who precedes them, can be viewed, at a higher level of resolution, as 7 universal characters, who may take on any of a variety of culture-specific identities. Myth describes the interactions of these characters. The great dragon of chaos, the Ouroboros, the self-devouring serpent, might be conceptualized as pure, latent information, before it is parsed into the world of the familiar, the unfamiliar, and the experiencing subject. The Ouroboros is the stuff of which categorical knowledge is composed before being that knowledge. It is the primary element of the world, which is decomposed into cosmos, surrounding chaos, and the exploratory process which separates the two. The bivalent Great Mother, second and third characters, is creation and destruction simultaneously, the source of all new things, the benevolent bearer and lover of the hero, the destructive forces of the unknown, the source of fear itself, constantly conspiring to destroy life. The bivalent divine son, fourth and fifth, is the sun god, the hero who journeys to the underworld to rescue his incapacitated ancestors, the messianic son of the Virgin Mother, savior of the world, and, simultaneously, his sworn adversary, arrogant and deceitful. The bivalent great father, sixth and seventh, is the wise king and the tyrant, cultural protection from the terrible forces of nature, security for the weak, and wisdom for the foolish. Simultaneously, however, he is the force who devours his own offspring, who rules the kingdom with a cruel and unjust hand, and who actively suppresses any sign of dissent or difference. Terrible, chaotic forces lurk behind the facade of the normal world. These forces are kept at bay by maintenance of social order. The reign of order is insufficient, however, because order itself becomes unbearing and deadly if allowed unregulated and permanent expression. The actions of the hero constitute an antidote to the deadly forces of chaos and to the tyranny of order. The hero creates order from chaos and reconstructs that order when necessary. His actions simultaneously ensure that novelty remains tolerable and that security remains flexible. Mephistopheles, congratulations before you depart from me. You know the devil, that is plain to see. Here, take this key. Faust, that little thing? But why? Mephistopheles, first grasp it. It is nothing to decry. Faust, it glows, it shines, increases in my hand. Mephistopheles, how great its worth you shall soon understand. The key will smell the right place from all others. Follow it down. It leads you to the mothers. Goethe. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Apprenticeship and Enculturation. Adoption of a shared map. Ideologies may be regarded as incomplete myths, as partial stories, whose compelling nature is a consequence of the appropriation of mythological ideas. The philosophy attributing individual evil to the pathology of social force constitutes one such partial story. Although society, the Great Father, has a tyrannical aspect, he also shelters, protects, trains, and disciplines the developing individual, and places necessary constraints on his thought, emotion, and behavior. Subjugation to lawful authority might more reasonably be considered in light of the metaphor of the apprenticeship. Childhood dependency must be replaced by group membership prior to the development of full maturity. Such memberships provide society with another individual to utilize as a tool, and provides the maturing but still vulnerable individual with necessary protection, with a group-fostered identity. The capacity to abide by social rules, regardless of the specifics of the discipline, can therefore be regarded as a necessary transitional stage in the movement from childhood to adulthood. Discipline should therefore be regarded as a skill that may develop through adherence to strict ritual, or by immersion within a strict belief system or hierarchy of values. Once such discipline has been attained, it may escape the bounds of its developmental precursor. It is in this manner that true freedom is attained. It is at this level of analysis that all genuine religious and cultural traditions and dogmas are equivalent, regardless of content. They are all masters whose service may culminate in the development of self-mastery, and consequent transcendence of tradition and dogma. Adoption of this analytic standpoint allows for a certain moral relativism, conjoined with an absolutist higher-order morality. The particulars of a disciplinary system may be somewhat unimportant. The fact that adherence to such a system is necessary, however, cannot be disregarded. Apprenticeship is necessary, but should not on that account be glamorized. Dogmatic systems make harsh and unreasonable masters. Systems of belief and moral action, and those who are identified with them, are concerned, above all, with self-maintenance and preservation of predictability and order. The necessarily conservative tendencies of great systems makes them tyrannical, and more than willing to crush the spirit of those they serve. Apprenticeship is a precursor to freedom, however, and nothing necessary and worthwhile is without its danger. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Appearance of Anomaly. Challenge to the Shared Map. Moral theories necessarily share common features with other theories. One of the most fundamental shared features of theories in general is their reliance on extra-theoretical presuppositions. The extra-theoretical presuppositions of explicit moral theorems appear to take implicit form in image and, more fundamentally, in action. Moral behaviors and schemas of valuation arise as a consequence of behavioral interaction undertaken in the social world. Every individual, motivated to regulate his emotions through action, modifies the behavior of others operating in the same environment. The consequence of this mutual modification, operating over time, is the emergence of a stable pattern of behavior designed to match individual and social needs simultaneously. Eventually, this behavioral pattern comes to be coded in image, heralded in narrative, and explicitly represented in words. In the integrated individual, or the integrated state, action, imagination, and explicit verbal thought are isomorphic. Explicit and image-mediated beliefs and actual behaviors form a coherent unit. Verbal theories of morality, explicit rules, match traditional images of moral behavior, and action undertaken remains in concordance with both. This integrated morality lends predictability to behavior, constitutes the basis for the stable state, and helps ensure that emotion remains under control. The emergence of anomaly constitutes a threat to the integrity of the moral tradition governing behavior and evaluation. Strange things or situations can pose a challenge to the structure of a given system of action and related beliefs, can pose such a challenge at comparatively restricted, normal, or broader, revolutionary, levels of organization. A prolonged drought, for example, at the social level, or the occurrence of a serious illness or disability on the personal, can force the reconstruction of behavior and the reanalysis of the beliefs that accompany, follow, and underlie such behavior. The appearance of a stranger, or, more commonly, a group of strangers, may produce a similar effect. The stranger acts out and holds different beliefs, using different implements and concepts. The mere existence of these anomalous beliefs, actions, and tools, generally the consequence of prolonged, complex, and powerful evolutionary forces, may be sufficient to totally transform or even destroy the culture which encounters them, unprepared. Cultures may be upset internally as well, as a consequence of this strange idea, or similarly, by the actions of the revolutionary. The capacity to abstract, that is, to code morality in image and word, has facilitated the communication, comprehension, and development of behavior and behavioral interaction. However, the capacity to abstract has also undermined the stability of moral tradition. Once a procedure has been encapsulated in image, and particularly in word, it becomes easier to modify, experimentally, but also easier to casually criticize and discard. This capacity for easy modification is very dangerous, in that the explicit and statable moral rules that characterize a given culture tend to exist for reasons that are still implicit and fundamental. The capacity to abstract, which has facilitated the communication of very complex and only partially understood ideas, is therefore also the capacity to undermine the very structure that lends predictability to action and which constrains the a priori meaning of things and situations. Our capacity for abstraction is capable of disrupting our unconscious, that is, imagistic and procedural, social identity, upsetting our emotional stability, and undermining our integrity, that is, the isomorphism between our actions, imaginings, and explicit moral theories or codes. Such disruption leaves us vulnerable to possession by simplistic ideologies, and susceptible to cynicism, existential despair, and weakness in the face of threat. The ever-expanding human capacity for abstraction, central to human consciousness, has enabled us to produce self-models sufficiently complex and extended to take into account the temporal boundaries of individual life. Myths of the knowledge of good and evil, and the fall from paradise, represent emergence of this representational capacity, in the guise of a historical event. The consequence of this event, that is, the development of self-consciousness, is capacity to represent death, and to understand that the possibility of death is part of the unknown. This contamination of anomaly with the possibility of death has dramatically heightened the emotional power and motivational significance of the unknown, and led to the production of complex systems of action and belief designed to take that terrible possibility into account. These complex systems of action and belief are religious. They comprise the traditional means of dealing with the shadow cast on life by knowledge of mortality. Our inability to understand our religious traditions, and our consequent conscious denigration of their perspectives, dramatically and unfortunately decrease the utility of what they have to offer. We are conscious enough to destabilize our beliefs and our traditional patterns of action, but not conscious enough to understand them. If the reasons for the existence of our traditions were rendered more explicit, however, perhaps we could develop greater intrapsychic and social integrity. The capacity to develop such understanding might help us use our capacity for reason to support, rather than destroy, the moral systems that discipline and protect us. Chapter 4.1 Introduction: The Paradigmatic Structure of the Known. The known is a hierarchical structure, composed of walls within walls. The individual sits at the middle of a series of concentric rings, composed of the integrated personalities of his ancestors, nested, at least in the ideal, within the figure of the exploratory hero. The inner walls are dependent for their protection, for their continued existence and validity, on the integrity of the outer walls. The farther out a given wall, the more implicit its structure, that is, the more it is incarnated in behavior and image rather than explicit in word. Furthermore, the farther out the wall, the older the personality, the broader range of its applicability, and the greater the magnitude of emotion it holds in check. Groups and individuals may share some levels of the known, but not others. The similarities account for shared group identity, insofar as that exists. The differences for the identification of the other with the forces of chaos. Rituals designed to strengthen group identity hold chaos at bay, but threaten individual identification with the exploratory hero, an identity upon which maintenance of the group ultimately depends. For the sake of the group, therefore, the individual must not be rendered subservient to the group. The aspects of things that are most important for us are hidden because of their simplicity and familiarity. One is unable to notice something because it is always before one's eyes. The real foundations of his inquiry do not strike a man at all, unless that fact has at some point struck him. And this means we fail to be struck by what, once seen, is most striking and powerful. Wittgenstein. Chapter 4.2 Particular Forms of Anomaly. The Strange, the Stranger, the Strange Idea, and the Revolutionary Hero. Anomalous events share capacity to threaten the integrity of the known, share ability to disrupt the familiar and explored. Such events, while differing in their specific details and manner of manifestation, tend to occupy the same natural category. Threats to the stability of cultural tradition emerge in four mythologically inseparable manners: through rapid natural environmental shift, independent of human activity, through contact with a heretofore isolated foreign culture, through application of novel, revolutionary, linguistically or episodically mediated critical skill, the inevitable consequence of increasing ability to abstract, learn, and communicate, and as a consequence of revolutionary, heroic activity. The natural human tendency to respond to the stranger, the strange idea, and the creative individual with fear and aggression can be more easily comprehended once it is understood that these diverse phenomena share a categorical identity with the natural disaster. The problem with this natural response pattern, however, is that the upsetting capacity of the anomalous is simultaneously the vital source of interest, meaning, and individual strength. Furthermore, the ability to upset ourselves, to undermine and revitalize our own beliefs, is an intrinsic, necessary, and divine aspect of the human psyche, is part of the seminal word itself. The word, in its guise as painstakingly abstracted action and object, can create new worlds and destroy old, can pose an unbearable threat to seemingly stable cultures, and can redeem those that have become senescent, inflexible, and paralytic. To those who have sold their souls to the group, however, the word is indistinguishable from the enemy. Chapter 4.3 The Rise of Self-Reference and the Permanent Contamination of Anomaly with Death. The appearance of anomaly can be less or more upsetting. Small manifestations of the unknown disrupt relatively small tracts of explored territory. Larger manifestations may disrupt all things previously taken for granted, even things invisible. Upsetting manifestations of the unknown may occur as a consequence of outside forces, geological, meteorological, even cosmological. Similarly, social transformations may upset the stable and familiar. Wars, revolutions, and migrations make the conditional nature of everything taken for granted evident once more. Internal transformations are just as likely to introduce instability. The process of maturation, in and of itself, is sufficient to disrupt the previously stable and well-adapted personality, and the little society of the family. Crises and adaptation may be brought about in childhood, at the onset of schooling and first independent contact with the unmediated social world. The hormonal changes and new social demands of youth may likewise transform the happy and reasonable child into the depressed and hostile adolescent. Some internal transformations are also natural and social events. The ever-expanding human capacity for abstract thinking, for example, appears to be a consequence of biological and social forces working synergistically. The human brain has evolved exceptionally quickly from the phylogenetic perspective. The language-mediated interpersonal interaction characteristic of ever larger human societies has provided that rapidly developing biological capacity with data, whose sophistication and breadth is increasing exponentially. This means that the human mind increasingly manifests the capacity to upset itself, to produce revelations, so to speak, that knock gaping holes in the previously sufficient adaptive and protective social and intrapsychic structures. The ever-expanding human capacity for abstraction has enabled us, as a species and as individuals, to produce self-models that include the temporal boundaries of existence. We have become able to imagine our own deaths, and the deaths of those we love, and to make a link between mortal fragility and every risk we encounter. Emergence of such capacity, which reoccurs with the maturation of every new human being, introduces the most intractable anomaly imaginable into the developmental course of every life. Myth represents the ever-recurring appearance of this representational ability. This emergent self-consciousness, the heritable sin of Adam, as incorporation of the forbidden fruit, development of knowledge of good and evil, and consequent expulsion from paradise. This appearance is an event of cosmic significance, driving the separation of heaven and earth, making human experience something eternally fallen, something ever in need of redemption. The unknown has become permanently contaminated with death for Homo sapiens. This contamination has tremendously heightened our general motivation, that is, our fear and curiosity, as we are able to perceive the potentially mortal consequences of every anomalous event. Our cultural creations, our great societies, and the beliefs that accompany them can be profitably viewed as driven by our knowledge of mortality, and by the energy, the heightened alertness and penetrating consciousness such knowledge inspires. Our great transpersonal cognitive power, however, has not yet rescued us from the valley of the shadow of death. What man is found such an idiot as to suppose that God planted trees in paradise, in Eden, like a husbandman, and planted therein the tree of life, perceptible to the eyes and sense, which gave life to the eater thereof, and another tree which gave to the eater thereof a knowledge of good and evil? I believe that every man must hold these things for images, under which the hidden sense lies concealed. Origin of Alexandria. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Hostile Brothers. Archetypes of Response to the Unknown. The contamination of anomaly with the threat of death, attendant on the development of self-consciousness, amplifies the valence of the unknown to a virtually unbearable point. This unbearable amplification has motivated the development of two transpersonal patterns of behavior and schemas of representation, comprising the individual as such, embodied in mythology as the hostile brothers. One of these hostile brothers, or eternal sons of God, is the mythological hero. He faces the unknown with the presumption of its benevolence, with the unprovable attitude that confrontation with the unknown will bring renewal and redemption. He enters voluntarily into creative union with the Great Mother, builds or regenerates society, and brings peace to a warring world. The other son of God is the eternal adversary. This spirit of unbridled rationality, horrified by his limited apprehension of the conditions of existence, shrinks from contact with everything he does not understand. This shrinking weakens his personality, no longer nourished by the water of life, and makes him rigid and authoritarian as he clings desperately to the familiar, rational, and stable. Every deceitful retreat increases his fear. Every new protective law increases his frustration, boredom, and contempt for life. His weakness, in combination with his neurotic suffering, engenders resentment and hatred for existence itself. The personality of the adversary comes in two forms, so to speak, although these two forms are inseparably linked. The fascist sacrifices his soul, which would enable him to confront change on his own, to the group, which promises to protect him from everything unknown. The decadent, by contrast, refuses to join the social world and clings rigidly to his own ideas, merely because he is too undisciplined to serve as an apprentice. The fascist wants to crush everything different, and then everything. The decadent immolates himself and builds the fascist from his ashes. The bloody excesses of the 20th century, manifest most evidently in the culture of the concentration camp, stand as testimony to the desires of the adversary, and as monument to his power. the pitfalls of fascism and decadence may be avoided through identification with the hero, the true individual. The hero organizes the demands of social being and the responsibilities of his own soul into a coherent, hierarchically arranged unit. He stands on the border between order and chaos and serves the group as creator and agent of renewal. The hero's voluntary contact with the unknown transforms it into something benevolent, into the eternal source, in fact, of strength and ability. Development of such strength, attended upon faith in the conditions of experience, enables him to stand outside the group when necessary and to use it as a tool rather than as armor. The hero rejects identification with the group as the ideal of life, preferring to follow the dictates of his conscience and his heart. His identification with meaning and his refusal to sacrifice meaning for security renders existence acceptable despite its tragedy. Chapter 5.1 Introduction: The Hero and the Adversary. The culture bequeathed to us by our forebears degenerates of its own accord, as the flux of the present invalidates the static presuppositions of the past. We may speed this process of degeneration by our sins, by voluntary refusal to attend to our errors when they manifest themselves, and by failure to adjust behaviors and attitudes in consequence. Through such refusal and failure, we transform the irritations of the present into the catastrophes of the future, and invite a wrathful God to drown us beneath the waves. As has been well known since the compilations made by R. Andre, H. Ussener, and G. J. Frazier, the deluge myth is almost universally disseminated. It is documented in all the continents, although very rarely in Africa, and on various cultural levels. A certain number of variants seem to be the result of dissemination, first from Mesopotamia and then from India. It is equally possible that one or several diluvial catastrophers gave rise to fabulous narratives, but it would be risky to explain so widespread a myth by phenomena of which no geological traces have been found. The majority of the flood myths seem in some sense to form part of the cosmic rhythm. The old world, peopled by a fallen humanity, is submerged under the waters, and sometime later a new world emerges from the aquatic chaos. In a large number of variants, the flood is the result of the sins, or ritual faults, of human beings. Sometimes it results simply from the wish of a divine being to put an end to mankind. The chief causes lie at once in the sins of men and the decrepitude of the world. By the mere fact that it exists, that is, that it lives and produces, the cosmos gradually deteriorates and ends by falling into decay. This is the reason why it has been recreated. In other words, the flood realizes, on the macrocosmic scale, what is symbolically affected during the New Year festival: the end of the world and the end of a sinful humanity, in order to make a new creation possible. Mircea Eliade. Chapter 5.2 The Adversary: Emergence, Development, and Representation. The figure of Satan is arguably the most well-developed representation of evil extant in religious and mythological thought. Although it is tempting to identify this personage with particular personality attributes, such as aggression, or with the differences of the stranger, it is more realistic to view him as the embodiment of a personal and social process. The devil is the spirit who underlies development of totalitarianism, the spirit who is characterized by rigid ideological belief, by the predominance of the rational mind, by reliance on the lie as a mode of adaptation, by refusal to admit the existence of error, or to appreciate the necessity of deviance, and by the inevitable development of hatred for the self and world. Each of these characteristics are intrinsically and causally related. They are linked inextricably together, and can be aptly conceptualized as transpersonal and eternal personality. The devil is willful rejection of the process that makes life bearable, out of spite for the tragic conditions of existence. This rejection is intellectually arrogant, because the conditions are interpreted, which is to say, development of self-consciousness tainted everything with death, but self-consciousness is contained within a global understanding that is still exceptionally limited in its scope. The present, as currently interpreted, is indeed the unbearable present, but that interpretation may change, if the possibility for change is not disallowed as a consequence of absolutist belief, conceit, and resentment. The devil works to eliminate the world as something whose weakness and vulnerability makes it contemptible. He has produced dreadful suffering in the 20th century, not least among cultures who dispensed with his image. We are fortunate to have survived without an irreversible tragedy. Our luck to date should not blind us to the dangers of continued ignorance, or to the necessity of bringing our poorly comprehended selves under control. Every technological advance we make increases our power. Every increase in power makes our internal integration and expanded self-consciousness that much more necessary. The noble soul has reverence for itself. Friedrich Nietzsche. Chapter 5.3 Heroic Adaptation. Voluntary Reconstruction of the Map of Meaning. The group provides the protective structure, conditional meaning, and behavioral pattern that enables the individual to cast off the dependence of childhood, to make the transition from the maternal to the social paternal world. The group is not the individual, however. Psychological development that ceases with group identification, held up as the highest attainable good by every ideologue, severely constricts individual and social potential and dooms the group, inevitably, to sudden and catastrophic dissolution. Failure to transcend group identification is, in the final analysis, as pathological as failure to leave childhood. Movement from the group to the individual, like that from childhood to the group, follows the archetypal transformative pattern of the heroic: paradise, breach, fall, redemption, stability, dissolution, incorporation, reconstruction. Such transformation must be undertaken voluntarily, through conscious exposure to the unknown, although it may be catalyzed by sufficiently unique or traumatic experience. Failure to initiate and/or successfully complete the process of secondary maturation heightens risk for intrapsychic and social decadence, and consequent experiential chaos, depression, and anxiety, including suicidal ideation, or enhances tendency towards fanaticism and consequent intrapsychic and group aggression. The Bible, considered as a single story, presents this process of maturation in mythological terms. The Old Testament offers group identity, codified by Moses, as antidote for the fallen state of man. This antidote, while useful, is incomplete. Even Moses himself, a true ancestral hero, fails to reach the promised land. The New Testament, by contrast, offers identification with the hero as the means by which the fallen state and the problems of group identity might both be permanently transcended. The New Testament has been traditionally read as a description of a historical event, which redeemed mankind once and for all. It might more reasonably be considered the description of a process that, if enacted, could bring about the establishment of peace on earth. The problem is, however, that this process cannot yet really be said to be consciously, that is, explicitly, understood. Furthermore, if actually undertaken, it is extremely frightening, particularly in the initial stages. In consequence, the imitation of Christ, or the central culture hero of other religious systems, tends to take the form of ritualistic worship, separated from other non-religious aspects of life. Voluntary participation in the heroic process, by contrast, which means courageous confrontation with the unknown, makes worship a matter of true identification. This means that the true believer rises above dogmatic adherence to realize the soul of the hero, to incarnate that soul in every aspect of their day-to-day life. This is easy to say, but very difficult to understand, and to do. It is no easy matter to translate the transpersonal myth of the hero into a template for action and representation in the unique conditions that make up an individual life. It appears equally troublesome, even hubristic, to presume that the individual might a force worthy of identification with the hero. Nonetheless, we are more than we seem, and are more troubled than we imagine, when undisciplined and unrealized. The banality of evil, Hannah Arendt's famous phrase, applied to the oft unprepossessing Nazi personality, is more accurately the evil of banality. Our petty weaknesses accumulate and multiply and become the great evils of state. As our technological power expands, the danger we possess increases, and the consequence of our voluntary stupidity multiply. It is increasingly necessary that we set ourselves, not others, right, and that we learn explicitly what that means. The nature of the process of identification with the hero can be understood in most detail as a consequence of the analysis of alchemy, which Jung made his life's work. Alchemy, considered most generally as the precursor of modern chemistry, was in fact a 20 centuries-long endeavor to understand the transformations of matter. The alchemical matter, however, was not the matter of modern science, logically enough, as the ancient alchemists practiced in the absence of the presumptions and tools of modern science. It was a substance more like Tao, to that which produced or constituted the flux of being, something more like information in the modern sense, if information may be considered latent in unexplored places, something more like the unknown as such, something like the matrix of being. Investigation of this intrinsically compelling matter, this unknown, produced a series of internal transformations in the alchemical psyche, making it ever more akin to the philosopher's stone, making it something that could turn base matter into spiritual gold, making it something that had, in addition, the eternal, durable, and indestructible nature of stone. As the alchemical endeavor progressed through the Christian era, the stone became increasingly assimilated to Christ, the cornerstone, rejected by the builders, the agent of voluntary transformation, whose actions eternally transformed the fallen world into paradise. The late-stage alchemists posited that a personality that had been completely assimilated to the spirit of the unknown was equivalent to Christ. Jung translated their image-laden mythological language into something more comprehensible, but not yet understood. The terrible central message of this mode of thought is this: do not lie, particularly to yourself, or you will undermine the process that gives you the strength to bear the tragic world. In your weakness, the consequence of your lie, you will become cruel, arrogant, and vengeful. You will then serve as an unconscious emissary of the agent of destruction, and work to bring about the end of time. Chapter 5.4 Conclusion: The Divinity of Interest. Anomalies manifest themselves on the border between chaos and order, so to speak, and have a threatening and promising aspect. The promising aspect dominates when the contact is voluntary, when the exploring agent is up to date, when the individual has explored all previous anomalies, released the information they contained, and built a strong personality and steady world from that information. The threatening aspect dominates when the contact is involuntary, when the exploring agent is not up to date, when the individual has run away from evidence of his previous errors, failed to extract the information lurking behind his mistakes, weakened his personality, and destabilized his world. The phenomenon of interest, that precursor to exploratory behavior, signals the presence of a potentially beneficial anomaly. Interest manifests itself where an assimilable but novel phenomenon exists, where something new hides in a partially comprehensible form. Devout adherence to the dictates of interest, assuming a suitably disciplined character, therefore ensures stabilization and renewal of personality and world. Interest is a spirit beckoning from the unknown, a spirit calling from outside the walls of society. Pursuit of individual interest means hearkening to this spirit's call, means journeying outside the protective walls of childhood dependence and adolescent group identification, means also return to and rejuvenation of society. This means that pursuit of individual interest, development of true individuality, is equivalent to identification with the hero. Such identification renders the world bearable, despite its tragedies, and reduces unnecessary suffering, which most effectively destroys, to an absolute minimum. This is the message that everyone wants to hear. Risk your security. Face the unknown. Quit lying to yourself and do what your heart truly tells you to do. You will be better for it. And so will the world. End of Chapter 5 and end of Maps of Meaning by Dr. Jordan Peterson.